Hey, I want to welcome you to part 2 of our Margin series. My name is Bob Pittenger and I'll be your host today. When the topic of margin is brought up, what's the first thing that comes to your mind? For me, it's time, but not in a healthy way. You see, I love to accomplish things. It gives me great joy to make things happen. When I took the Clifton Strength Finders test, 5 of my top 10 were on executing, and 3 of the 10 were on strategic thinking. That means 8 of my top 10 related to getting stuff done. This is a passion for me, and it's how God designed me. However, I don't get to use God's design as an excuse for not having margin in my life, especially regarding time. Just like you, God designed me with certain gifts and passions and has allowed me to experience certain things that have influenced who I am today. Now, if left to my own planning, I would schedule 200 hours weekly to get stuff done. You know what the problem is with that? There are only 168 hours in a week, and I have to sleep at least 40 to 50 of those, right? So over the years, I've learned to use my God-given design to glorify Him in a way that satisfies my desire and my passion to get stuff done. That's precisely what this series on margin is about. It's prioritizing our time according to God's plan. His plan is the very best for us, so we need to construct our lives around His plan. This means making God's desire our desire. God's plan, our plan. We see a great example of this in Jesus' life in the way that He set time with God as a priority. In Matthew chapter 14, He went out to be alone with God when He heard that John the Baptist had been killed. In Mark chapter 1, verse 35, we see Jesus getting up extra early, going to an isolated place and praying all alone. Jesus knew talking with Father God was necessary, so He built margin into His schedule for prayer. Now, that doesn't mean Jesus wasn't crazy busy, because when we look closely at the Gospels, we see how chaotic and busy His life truly was. In Mark chapter 5, verse 31, we see people pressing in on Jesus like a crowd leaving a football game when Jesus asks, "Who touched me?" The disciples asked Jesus, "There are all kinds of people pressing against you. There's hundreds of people around you, and you want to know who touched me." Jesus is walking from one town to another, and this huge crowd is pressing in on Him. He can barely move, and this is what it was like for Him every single day. There were always people surrounding Him, wanting something from Him. In Mark chapter 3, we see that Jesus is teaching in a home. And so many people are coming and going that He doesn't have time to stop and eat a meal. It was so bad that His family thought He had lost His senses and was out of His mind. Then another one is in Mark chapter 2. You are familiar with this. Jesus is teaching in the home of Peter, but there's no longer room in the house for anyone to get in. So what happens? A group of guys cut a hole in the roof to lower a paralyzed man down to Jesus. Now, let me just stop here for a second. If you're a host home, just tell people in your group they're not allowed to cut a hole in your roof, all right? Let's just settle that. The church doesn't want that. You don't want that. But that's what it was like at Jesus. There are several times where His ministry had been so busy that Jesus took His disciples and went away together just to get a break. And so He is taking times away to get a break. Now, notice Jesus was crazy busy, being pulled in many different directions, and yet He set margin for He and the disciples to take time away. Let me ask you this. If God expected Jesus to have margin, should we expect it any different for us? Jesus took time in the mornings to get alone with His Father before the day's stress. What an example for us. We need to take time to connect with God before we start our day. Now, I like to start my day off with praise and worship of God. Now, when I say that, you may think about me singing songs, but I don't necessarily mean singing, but praising Him with my words for what He has done, and then worshiping Him for who He is. Then I ask Him to fill me with His Spirit and help keep my mind fixed on Him, especially with all I have to accomplish that day. This always helps me remember that God is my priority for the rest of my day. Then I go about my day, I do my things, and then I reconnect with God in the evening after I get home from work or just before I go to bed. I want to take time to slow down and share with Him the things that distracted me or took my eyes off of Him. I list the things that caused me worry, stress, or concern, and then I give them to Him and ask Him to clear my mind and help me have a peaceful night's rest and sleep. So remember, every single day we're going to be busy. Nevertheless, we must take time to reconnect with God. This means you have to figure out how and when is the best time for you. Some people like to read. Some want to go for walks. Some like to work out, while others like to sit in a quiet place and sip a cup of tea or coffee. The idea is for us to sit down and enjoy our time with Him. Did you catch that? The idea is for us to sit down and enjoy our time with Him. We should savor every moment that we have with God. I heard of a woman who had lost 100 pounds on a diet. Once a month, she allowed herself to eat a chocolate chip cookie. Because it was only once a month, it would take her 30 minutes to eat the cookie. Why? Because she savored every bite. She knew she had to wait a month to eat another cookie. And so she would savor every bite, and it would take her a half hour to eat one cookie. That's how we should look at our time with Father God. We should savor our time with Him because we know how crazy busy the rest of our day will be. And if we were honest, we don't always think to check in with Him in the middle of our crazy, right? Each day is filled with us pursuing things we think are necessary or will give us great fulfillment. However, when we see God with our resurrected eyes, we will realize that we were going down one dead-end road after another, pursuing what we thought we wanted. However, what we were really longing for was God Himself. During your discussion time, talk honestly about why we spend so much time and energy pursuing things that never satisfy or compare to an intimate relationship with God. I pray God will draw you closer to Him as you seek new ways to prioritize margin in the time you have each week.